Doctors must stop participating in executions in the United States.
That was Dr. Abraham Halpern, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at New York Medical College. I'm Dr. Michael Blumenfield, and this is Shrinkpod. From the campus of New York Medical College and the Behavioral Health Center at Westchester Medical Center in Valhalla, New York, I'm Dr. Michael Blumenfield, Professor of Psychiatry, and this is Shrinkpod. This podcast will bring to you information, commentary, and interviews with experts on topics in mental health and psychiatry. You can subscribe to receive this podcast on a regular basis, and your comments and suggestions are always welcome. My email address is shrinkpod@aol.com. And now for today's program. My guest today is Dr. Abraham Halpern, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at New York Medical College. He's past president of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law and a leading expert in ethics and forensic psychiatry. Welcome to Shrinkpod, Dr. Halpern.
Thank you.
You've been involved in many issues that deal with the influence between psychiatry, ethics, and forensics. And one of these has been the questions of the role of the physician in an execution, particularly the role of a psychiatrist in an execution. In general, looking at all physicians, do physicians usually participate in a legal execution, such as starting an intravenous or declaring a patient dead?
Physicians often do participate, and this is not generally well known, but it is a fact that they do. It's not just by injecting a lethal substance. It's by training other people to do that and watching the electrocardiogram during an execution. That is prohibited. One important prohibition, according to the Code of Medical Ethics, is the treatment of an incompetent death row inmate. He's incompetent now, treating him so that he becomes competent. Okay. That also is prohibited.
Before we get to that, though, is that you're saying that there's an official position of the medical profession about the role of physician participating in an execution. Is that right?
That's correct. The Code of Medical Ethics is produced by the American Medical Association, and it's very clear. That same code, by the way, has been adopted by the American Psychiatric Association and covers all psychiatrists.
But isn't it true that a psychiatrist, who of course is a physician, might testify that a particular person was not under the influence of a mental illness at the time that they committed the crime or the murder, and therefore the psychiatrist is participating in the process leading to an execution?
Well, no, for two reasons. First of all, the Code of Medical Ethics makes it very clear that a psychiatrist can testify in an insanity defense case, for example, or subsequently if an individual is found guilty at a sentencing hearing. That is not considered unethical. Now, as to whether that is a participation in an eventual execution, the answer to that is no, because about 99% of such evidence that's presented, such testimony, does not involve a sentence of death.
All right, let's look at the process which might occur on death row. If a prisoner is awaiting an execution and that prisoner becomes psychotic and is hallucinating and is very agitated, might that patient require psychiatric care and participation by the psychiatrist with giving medication?
It is ethical for the psychiatrist to treat such an individual if it's a severe mental illness and involves a danger to that individual.
Okay, let's assume that the medication made the patient more calm and no longer psychotic. Wouldn't that make the patient then qualify for an execution, and therefore the psychiatrist was participating in an execution?
Very complicated issue, and it's a good question. But if an individual is being treated to render him competent to be executed, that treatment is prohibited unless an order is issued by the court commuting the sentence to life imprisonment. In that case, it's appropriate to treat the individual to render him competent.
And suppose there wasn't a question of life imprisonment. The plan was to execute the person, but the individual is psychotic and agitated. Isn't it the humane thing for a doctor to treat that man before he's executed?
No, it isn't, because it depends on the particular condition and what treatment means. The person does not have to be treated to the point where he becomes competent to be executed.
Your main view is against capital punishment. Isn't that true?
I happen to be opposed to capital punishment.
And therefore, in your ethical system, you want to do everything to prevent execution.
My personal, yes, I would want the death penalty abolished, but that's not a realistic approach to a problem that we have in some 38 states in the United States.
Do you think that another person who ethically felt that execution was acceptable might, as a physician, also feel that it was ethical to do everything to make the execution as painless and as humane as possible?
That is the argument that's made by some physicians. They feel they have a duty to society to follow the laws of society, and they do feel that they have a way of making the execution less painful, less traumatic for the individual. However, recently studies have been done which show that even the method of lethal injection includes drugs that don't really put the person completely to sleep. They paralyze the individual so he's not able to express the pain that he feels when a substance, for example, is injected to stop the heart from beating. So there are a lot of problems with that, and that's why the Supreme Court of the United States has just accepted a case where they're going to review this whole subject as to whether it's cruel and unusual punishment to subject a death row inmate to a lethal execution.
Do you have any predictions how this Supreme Court's going to rule on that case?
Well, it's going to be 5-4, and I can't predict which way it's going to go.